Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us. This is the Maverick Podcast. I am your host, DJ Maverick. Today, we have a rising artist in the building, the one and only Lauren Kelly. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. You flatter me. My gosh.
That's awesome. Maybe for the 1% of the people out there that don't know who you are, tell us a little bit about yourself.
1%.
1%, absolutely.
Well, so I'm a visual artist from Norman. I'm Citizen Potawatomi.
Okay.
And I recently, within the last few years, took a year out of the workforce just to focus on my art because I hadn't spent that kind of time with it in a very long time.
So the other cool thing that I was reading is that you grew up with your grandmother also being a painter, and you sort of played in her studio, it sounds like. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, my maternal grandmother is a Western painter. So she does the whole, like, the stereotypical cowboys and Indians and, like, cows and pastures and all that stuff.
Awesome.
So it was a little odd because my mom's family is not Native at all.
Oh, really?
My dad's family is. So I was, like, the little Native girl in the family.
Yeah, that's cool. What was that like, just being surrounded by painting and art the entire time? I mean, being a kid, to me, it sounds awesome, but you tell me.
It was a mixed bag for sure, just because my grandma is not like a traditional, like what you think of when you think of an artist. She's the furthest thing from bohemian but in a lot of respects. But it was really cool to be able to experiment, and being an only child too, I spent so much time alone that it was really important to like get that time to just flex my creativity. So.
Interesting. So would you say you being the only child, like sort of like made you become an artist, just like because you're like, I got to entertain myself?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I was always a little bit like different as a kid, and still am to this day. Like I was always the weird kid growing up, and so I think that my inner world needed like a place to go, a place to live. So through art, I could give it that.
Got it. What about in school? Did you do anything in school, like any sports or anything, or what were you into?
I was so clumsy growing up, and I still am to an extent. I couldn't even figure out how to like run until the last couple of years. It was terrible, but I was always into the arts and into music. So I was singing, playing piano. I used to have this old British piano teacher who had been raised in India. Her dad was, I guess, an officer stationed there whenever it was under occupation. And she looked and sounded like Ms. Doubtfire. And I would go to her house every week after school, and she'd be, Lauren, dearie, why didn't you practice?
That's amazing. So was it like the fun Mrs. Doubtfire, or was it like the strict, you got to practice?
All of the above. If you walked in on tea time, it was fun. If you didn't walk in on tea time and you hadn't practiced, it was like, oh, you're about to get your like, butt handed to you.
Nice. So my understanding too is that you did some vocal, like singing, maybe some recording.
Oh yeah. I did a lot of singing growing up. I did like independent stuff, trying to just like record and experiment myself. But then I also was involved in choirs and vocal music growing up, like the whole nine.
Cool. Tell me a little bit more about that. It was like classical singing or what?
Yes. Yeah. So my primary focus was classical singing. I was in an honor choir, which like I know everybody brags about their high school choir, but ours was highly competitive, even on the national level, and under a fantastic teacher. So I still brag him up to this day.
That's amazing.
We also did a jazz choir, which is like a 14-person ensemble that you had to audition for every single year. And that was probably the highlight of that school music career.
Very cool. So you had all these creative outlets. How did you land on one, or did you land on one, or you just like to do everything? Because I enjoy doing a bunch of stuff, so I can definitely identify with that.
I'm pretty well the same way. I'm like naturally, I don't want to be a jack of all trades, but I land on that no matter what I do. So I have to have my fingers in a bunch of different things at all times, always. Yeah.
Have you continued the singing, or you put that on the back burner a little bit, or what?
Definitely privately. I let go of it for a very long time, just due to some like personal stuff that kind of came up that drove me away from it. But once I got a little bit older, and especially into the pandemic, I invested again in my singing. And by invested, I just mean like gave myself the time and the space to really play around with music again. And I'm finding I'm really liking it. I'm not really ready to do anything publicly with it yet, but
that's cool. I was reading that there was a point in your time that you sort of did away with all your artwork. Is that correct? Yeah,
I probably looked like the crazy neighbor. That was right before I moved to Tulsa. And
what happened?
Well, I just had a bunch of personal things kind of hit the fan all at once. And I guess I don't want to get into the specifics of the what, but it was like, you know, when like life just punches you in the mouth a few times in a row. Yeah. And you're just like, oh,
And is like your artwork like connected with what you're going through and stuff like that?
My
or
artwork
what?
was so deeply personal to me, and I felt like my personhood itself had been undermined so much, and like I didn't have control over myself or my life or really anything. And so I had this one day where I just said screw it, and I was like the neighbor that was taking all of my canvases outside and throwing them in the dumpster. And maybe I kept like one or two of them in a box and put them away, but I didn't really touch my art deeply again until like very recently.
Yeah. Do you think you needed that, or do you kind of regret that you did that in a way, or you think like that's good, I want to leave all that behind?
I spent a lot of time regretting it, but the more that I lean in now, the more I realize I think I really needed that time away from it in order to reconnect with myself. And understand the direction that my art wanted to take, because that was kind of the focus of the year off, was not to start selling art or to become like the next Picasso, but really to just drill in and allow myself to do that for my own mental and spiritual health more than anything.
I see. So speaking of Picasso, who would you say are like your major influences? Because when I see your art style, I see like a lot of strong like women theme, a lot of spiritual themes. I see some that it's kind of hard, which I enjoy that type of art to identify, like, is this supposed to make me happy or sad? Like sometimes I'm like, okay, I don't know about this painting. So tell me a little bit about like your influences and maybe your style. How would you describe it?
For sure. I have landed recently on describing my style as transcendental figurative art, or transcendental contemporary figurative, which is just a bunch of mumbo jumbo to mean that like it focuses on the human figure, so we can call it figurative. It's not exactly realist, and it's not exactly modern or abstract. So we're going to settle with contemporary.
Yeah, it's difficult to land on the style because everything is a little bit different too. So
for sure,
it was hard for me to say, okay, this is kind of her vibe. Like it was hard to identify that.
Yeah, probably some of my biggest influences would be like even when I was really a little girl, I was always drawn to the old Stoics, like the capital S Stoics. So a lot of times ideology influences me more than like outward style. Although in terms of style, I definitely draw on like, I guess pre-Christian art from the world over, pre-Abrahamic art even.
I can see that.
I look at a lot of the like relief sculptures that you see on ancient Mesoamerican architecture, all the way to like things that they dig up at Knossos, just anywhere where you can see what that, I guess, early, not primitive, but perhaps primordial human understanding of the self and the chemistry of the whole is. I'm sorry, I just went onto another planet.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay. Yeah, I love hearing you describe it, because I always think that there's like a spiritual undertone or a deeper meaning behind all your paintings. And the thing I enjoy about you too is like you post like early in the morning, right?
Oh,
always like it's always like something like, oh, like here's a new artwork, which is cool, right? What made you sort of like start doing that?
I love my early mornings.
Yeah.
And my friends think I'm kind of crazy, and maybe they're right.
So it's not scheduled. Like you're waking up that early and posting.
I am. I mean, I make drafts and stuff just to make it easier on myself to post consistently, because like building a social media following is probably my singular biggest goal this year. So I need to be consistent with that.
Okay.
But being up and actually doing the work early in the mornings before I go to my day job is like the way that I nourish my spirit. And
That's
so
awesome.
A lot of times that kicks off with, okay, which draft do I want to post? Do I want to make any edits? Okay, what do I want to work on this morning? All that stuff.
The thing I like about your post too is that you put yourself in with the picture, right? With the artwork, which a lot of artists don't. So you never really get to see who the artist behind all the artwork, but you can like sort of see like, oh, it's her creating the art, which is cool. Why would you say you do that? Just like to make that connection with everybody, or what?
Yeah, I kind of, it's kind of like, I know that I don't have a whole lot of time in my schedule at this point in my career to really be out networking a whole lot. Right. And so I want to make it really, really easy for people, like if I run into them at a show or something, to know that it's me. Not that I expect people to be looking for me, but I want to remove barriers so that it's a lot easier. And also like, I do want to share a little bit of myself so that when it comes time to like shake hands, say hello, I know that I always struggle with like nervousness and feeling like I haven't connected well with a person before. And so I want to remove that for other people as well. That's
awesome. Yeah, you should definitely continue that, because it does add that personal touch to every post.
Oh, I'm so glad.
And when I see it every morning, it's like, okay, cool. This is like sort of like has become a ritual almost, like check out like your stuff. So that's really cool.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah. But my understanding before you got into sort of like the type of artwork you were doing like aura, watercolor. Like, tell me about that, because I don't even know what that means. I just know aura and watercolor, but tell me what that exactly means.
So when I was about 17 years old, I used to, whenever like my peers were sneaking out to go party, I was sneaking away dollars to go buy a booth at like a metaphysical fair to go try to sell my art. And while I was there, I had so many people encourage me to like try my hand at divination and stuff. And growing up Native, raised by my mom, who is absolutely not, and her family is very strictly Baptist. I always felt like I didn't quite fit in spiritually. And so finding a place where I was encouraged to kind of delve into maybe a little bit more fluid spirituality was really valuable. And I also learned that you could make money if you were good at it. So I could actually pay for the booths easier and make maybe higher value art that would be less likely to sell immediately. But when it did sell, it would be higher ticket and just better all around and better connections. So I got into the tarot, and then from there, somebody suggested to me, hey, I see you doing like this thing that you should totally try. I see it in my mind's eye, and I want to see you give it a go. And I remember the first person that I actually gave into with that, she like walked up to me and she was like, "You're Lauren." And I was like,
really?
Yeah. Like I had a sign that said that. Wow. So I was like, yeah, that's me. And she said, "I had a dream and I saw you and you painted my soul." Wow. And I was like, oh, geez.
Interesting. So, no pressure. Right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. So like I stepped out into the hall with her at this event, and like I used colored pencils because that's what I had with me to like draw out things and label them. And by the end of it, she was like crying and being like, "Oh my God, you need to tell your mentor that you're ready." And I was like, I don't have a mentor.
That's amazing. So how did you teach yourself, or how did you discover that you had that talent?
I just stumbled into it like headlong, quite honestly. I mean, I'd always been interested in global religions and global philosophies, and especially, like I said earlier, the pre-Abrahamic stuff. And so for me, being able to delve in like what our instincts show us and what our subconscious shows us was really, really valuable.
Interesting.
And so just giving myself like a framework to tap into that, kind of like in my tech J job, everything is about the system answer. So giving myself a system for that, where I could say, okay, I'm going to depict this, and this area of life in this, and this areas of this portrait, and so on and so forth. Really gave a methodology to that so that then I could do it for about 10 years.
Cool. So you got a booth, and then strangers would just come up and you would like paint something.
And this was several fairs in that it was like a gradual trickle. And then finally, after I had gotten rid of my art, I signed up for one of those fairs, and I said, hey, is it cool if I just read at this one instead of doing the art? And they were like, yeah, sure. You can just do a reader booth. And so I ended up doing that. And that was like my main thing, especially all the way through college. So
interesting. I would think that you would need like high level concentration, but if you're at a booth, there's so many distractions, like people walking by, all kinds of noises. You were able to focus and still deliver doing that?
It took a little time to get comfortable with it, and I've never been like really a good public speaker naturally, so it took a lot of practice and all that stuff. And of course, I wish that I had like my auto sales background before doing that, because I probably could have done a lot better.
You read my mind, because that's where I was going to head next. So you got into sales, and it sounds like you did that. You moved up the ranks, maybe went into finance, it sounds like. But then what happened? You just weren't enjoying it, or too much pressure, or what happened in that career? A lot
of personal things kind of hit the fan at the same time, as well as that particular career within that particular company at that particular time. It brought me to a really, really bad mental place, and to a more severe place than I'd ever been in my life. I've struggled with pretty intense negative thoughts and feelings toward myself since I was, maybe 10 or 11, just due to some things that, happened. Life is going to punch you in the mouth, and it's going to do that to different people at different times in different ways. And I just happened to get it kind of early. So I've been carrying those with me for a long time, but they really reached a peak where I needed to be hospitalized while I was working in that high pressure job. And when I was in there, the type of hold that they do for what I was experiencing is typically a 72-hour hold. So they're like, we're going to just stabilize you in crisis and then send you home and maybe hook you up with a therapist. That's the usual protocol. But for me, the psychiatrist knew that would not suffice. Because he was like, if I let you go, you're going to do something to yourself as soon as I let you go. So I ended up there for 2 weeks. And during that 2 weeks, I started drawing again, just for myself, not for anybody else. And it was then that I was like, okay, I think I need to make some big changes, because obviously what I'm doing isn't working. So I need to change career. I need to make sure art is part of my daily life in some capacity, and my own art, not for somebody else. And I need to like make sure that I audit my friend relationships, my family relationships, that I implement good structure in those areas. So all of that change kind of happened at the same time.
Yeah. So you were literally at the hospital and then you just picked up art again.
Yeah,
and
there was nothing to do for a lot of days.
True,
so
right?
It's like they had like coloring book pages and stuff, and we're all like adults in there looking at each other like, what am I going to color Finding Nemo?
Yeah, you're like doing like paint by numbers or something.
Yeah. And so I finally asked one of the orderlies there, I was like, hey, do you have any like just plain copier paper and like maybe some other markers than these? And they were like, yeah, sure. So that's kind of how that came about.
Cool. So would you say your artwork is like an outlet and it like helps you sort of de-stress with everything going on in life?
Absolutely. Yeah. I usually with my artwork talk about post-traumatic growth, which a lot of people know about like post-traumatic stress, but post-traumatic growth, and some of this verbiage I gained from a mental health degree that I did, but post-traumatic growth refers to the ways in which you adapt and strengthen through trauma. Kind of like how whenever you're resting after a really, really hard workout, your body is reconnecting those tissues and nourishing them and stuff. Post-traumatic growth is kind of the same thing, but emotionally. That whenever you've gone through a serious period of trauma or a serious period of pain or a serious period of isolation, you can use that recovery period in order to actually launch yourself forward in some ways. Okay. And obviously that's easier said than done.
Definitely. Yeah. And it's interesting because I've never heard the growth aspect, right? You always hear sort of like the negative side, but not the growth.
Or like the disorder version, which is perfectly legitimate. But yeah, the growth is really important. And I actually ended up doing like my thesis about it whenever I was graduating and didn't realize how relevant it would be until I was doing the art in the hospital and thinking, man, I think I should have been here a lot sooner.
Interesting. So tell me about that degree and what made you gravitate towards that? Like, how did you start that?
Sheer accident.
Really?
I was really interested in art history and arts management. And my family wanted me to get a degree, and I've always hated school. I hate school. I love learning, but I hate school.
What did you hate about it? The structure or the people, or like what did you hate about it? You like everything?
Everything. I mean, I like writing a lot. I've always been hyperlexic. Like I was the freaky kid reading books at 3 and reading Dan Brown when I was 10 and all that stuff. So it's not necessarily the studies, but more like that there was a specific slant that they wanted to go. And if you pointed out something that wasn't quite within that, and for me, that experience was a little bit more in the direction of like, I was always not good enough to fit in with the like super left-leaning kids because I had a different perspective than them from my like super rural Baptist upbringing.
Right.
But then I also wouldn't fit in with like the right-wing kids because they would see me as like, there's that Indian girl. So I was the perennial other and always have been ever since I was a child too. And it's weird because as I'm an adult, a lot of people don't clock that about me so instantly. But as a kid, they really did. And I think it was just where I was growing up. But that meant that I really didn't fit in school either. Like when I tried to raise my hand to a professor to say like, hey, just so you know, like this line in this textbook is actually like really inaccurate. And here's the history on it. And here's the receipts that I can provide with that. And they would say, well, you know, things were different at that time. It was okay to treat people this way and that way and whatnot. And it's like, no, the history says that it wasn't actually. There were people fighting against that.
Yeah, and the whole point of learning is to have different, you know, opinions and like sort of debate, like all that is like what you should encourage, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So I think I've gotten a little bit more mainstream acceptable since doing the car sales, just because whenever you do automotive or any kind of sales, it pushes you to like present yourself in a certain way. But definitely growing up, it was so like I was the perennial misfit no matter what.
Man. Yeah. And I don't know if you want to dive into this or not. So definitely you don't feel like you have to, but you sort of like had to face your parents' divorce at an early age, right? Yeah. So how was that for you? Was that pretty tough? Or I can imagine it'd be tough, but
I mean, when you're a little kid and you're going through it, you normalize everything. Everything you just take in stride because that's what your brain is built to do.
True.
But it's as I've gotten older that I've realized, wow, that was really not normal. And the reasons that I responded by things like extreme people pleasing and extreme rebellion at the same time were actually.
So you had sort of like both extremes there going on.
Yeah. Those were due to like what we call parentification in mental health, which doesn't necessarily mean that you're being asked to literally be a parent. It can, but it means that you're being asked to take on an emotional role of an adult. Okay. And it's not necessarily intentional. Like your parents don't necessarily do that on purpose, but they can still land on it if they're really immature in certain aspects. And with the way that mine were, it was like, oh God, because they're very like, at least somewhat polished people on the outside. But in terms of that emotional dynamic, especially when I was younger, and being the only child and them not being fully honest with each other about whether they were spending adequate time with me whenever one had me or something.
Yeah, but that's tough. And you just sort of kept that bottled up or what?
Absolutely. And you learn to keep secrets on behalf of other people. I kept, my dad was seeing this woman that he left my mom for, and I wasn't supposed to tell my mom that he was spending the whole weekend with her in his room instead of with me on my weekend with him. And so I learned to keep these secrets. And of course, later when you get to be like an older kid or a teenager, that also means that you keep secrets about things that happen to you.
True.
And then you get older and older and think, oh my God, was I supposed to keep this secret? Right. Was I supposed to tell somebody? And when did I try to tell somebody and they didn't hear me?
Were you able to overcome that? Are you able to open up with people now too? Or is there like always like a barrier before you sort of like let your guard down?
There's always a barrier, but I mean, certainly better now than I was. And the art has definitely helped with that, because what happened in that period where I embraced again my art was that I was also embracing myself again and being like, you know what? I don't have to be like pretty and comfortable all the time. I don't have to be presentable all the time. My art can be that expression of those pieces of myself that I'm really struggling with or grappling with. Yeah. Especially those pieces that maybe aren't so fun to talk about, because like I can't go to my mom and be like, hey, making sure that I felt like an outsider for being like a different ethnicity than you was not cool. Yeah, with her actually hearing it. Or I can't go to my dad and be like, hey, being involved with that sketchy group of people it was not okay. And that still hurts me to this day. Like,
it's tough. Yeah.
So it's part of like just accepting like that certain people are not going to be the people that you need, but you certainly can be.
We're talking about the struggle, but maybe there is a silver lining there along the way. Yeah.
Yeah. I love to listen to other people and support other people. Historically, I've done that to my own detriment, but with consistent work, you can get healthy with your own boundaries. And, I still take so much joy even today in like certain volunteering efforts that I don't necessarily want to go hype up, but I'm really, really happy to do them. And they just light me up. Or like being able to, even as much as like hold a door or like buy dinner for a friend every now and again, like those things give me so much joy.
Yeah, that's cool.
In a way that I don't know that I'd have that appreciation for otherwise.
Yeah, that's very cool. So you got your degree. It sounds like you didn't want to, but you did it anyway.
I did it anyway.
And then what happened? Did you sort of practice your degree at all? Or where did you go after you got your degree?
Well, I had only switched into the mental health research stuff because it seemed like it could keep my attention long enough to get the degree. Yeah. Frankly, I didn't realize how useful it would be in the long run. Mm-hmm. And it was important for me to get a degree because nobody in my mom's family and my direct lineage had gotten a degree. Okay. And in my dad's lineage, I was going to be the first Native woman to have a degree. Wow. And
congrats. So that's a big win, right?
It was a big deal. And to finish with that. So on both sides, I'm that first directly to get that. So it was more important just to get it and get out than anything else. Yeah. And the car sales just kind of happened serendipitously. It was like they had a receptionist job open. Okay. And I was like, oh, I'm about to finish school. I want to go ahead and start, getting in the workforce and not relying on my tarot for that, because that's peaks and valleys. Right. Even if you're good at it, it doesn't pay you benefits, right? Mm-hmm. So I wanted to get like a big girl job. So I started that. And then they said, hey, we want you on sales. And I went, are you crazy?
You're like, I have to talk to strangers.
Like me?
Yeah.
But that just kind of led that way. And then it all kind of panned out in a way that I couldn't have predicted early on. I couldn't have predicted like needing my degree just for my own internal work, or needing the sales experience so that I could go do my art stuff, or any of that. It just panned out.
And there's a lot of pressure, right? To make quotas and stuff. Like the car industry is pretty like, cutthroat, right?
It absolutely is. I was working for a dealership that was, the whole auto group was non-commission.
Oh, really?
But you still have to sell really intensely. Our goal was, if I remember right, it was like 12 new cars a month.
Wow.
If you could.
So what's the incentive? If I'm not getting a commission, what's the
you get
incentive?
a bonus.
You get a bonus.
But it's like a flat bonus.
Okay.
So it would be like on top of your paycheck that you would do that.
Okay.
And so I did sales, I did internet sales, I did finance, the whole gamut.
Yeah. Interesting. So you did that for a while, and then it sounds like you were like, okay, I'm going to just take some time off. Right?
Yeah. Well, it was about the time that when I got back from my hospital stay, I knew something needed to change, and I reconnected with my bestie, who's a product owner at a tech firm now. But at the time, she was working on one of their data teams, and she said, "Girl, I need somebody over here. Are you interested in looking for a different job?" And I said, that is perfect.
Yeah.
It's perfect timing.
But you have never done any IT, anything. So
never. Unfortunately, it was like very entry. It was like, I mean, it was, I don't want to say data entry because it was a lot of like visual and human interpretation type of analysis, but it was not like statistical analytics or like running a ton of SQL queries or anything right off the bat. So they kind of eased me in there. And I was able to get into it.
Yeah. So were you intimidated at all, or you just like, okay, I'll try this. No big deal.
I was intimidated, but I think after car sales, I hadn't.
You're like, I can do whatever.
I can do whatever. Yeah. I mean, what's the worst that's going to happen? They're going to tell me to screw off, and I'm going to screw off. It's that simple.
Yeah. That's cool. So you got into tech and you enjoyed it? Like was that a good change?
I'm still in it because my firm, whenever I told them that I was leaving for a year off, they told me, we love that idea.
Really?
It's great.
Oh, wow.
And,
I need to work where you were.
I know. Right? They were like, listen, whenever you want to come back to the workforce, come see what we've got.
So do they have like an official, because it is popular in tech to have like an official like sabbatical.
Not like, for as early as I was in it, unfortunately.
Okay.
But they were, maybe they thought I was a little bit crazy. I don't know. Maybe I am. But I had reached a certain goal with myself. And, you know, I bought my own home when I was 24 after kind of like a rough breakup and life circumstance change and all these things kind of at the same time. So it's like I already had this place that I knew that I could, you know, I had a fixed interest rate, so it's not going to change on me anytime soon. I don't have to depend on a landlord. And I looked around and thought, okay, I don't have kids. I'm in good health. And this moment where I can take this time off might not happen again.
Yeah, that would be so cool. Man, walk me through that. Please tell me that was amazing. What did you do during this sabbatical? Because I've always been curious, like, what do people do? Some like go like mountain climbing or something. But you tell me what you did.
I was so strict with my budget that I let myself like buy like, I don't know if you've ever been on YouTube and stumbled across that like Depression era lady that cooks stuff from her like mom's cookbook. Her name's Clara. And I think she might have passed away, bless her heart. But she used to do these videos where she would talk about all her like super cheap recipes. That was like my grocery list during this entire year,
funny.
right? And then I had a little bit of money that I could use on some art supplies.
Okay.
And of course, right about the time that I left, within a couple of weeks, my AC went out and I had to replace my AC.
Always something.
And then a couple weeks after that, some guys that were redoing the roofs on our condos, they put nails through my supply lines and I had to pay that out of pocket. But then, you know, what I showed myself through that was like, actually, I budgeted really well and I can do this.
Wow.
And I ended up staying out the full year and just focusing on making art. And then I spent some time on like data camp, really improving my coding. Because the more I got into it, the more I thought like, okay, I don't necessarily want to be like the coding maestro over here.
Right.
But I do want to know a little bit more. So that I
at
can
least
be
like SQL or something, right? Like everybody needs to know that, right?
Yeah, especially for like if I wanted to go back into like database work, which is what I do now and I love it. Then I was thinking, okay, I need to know kind of the basics in that direction. And maybe stack on some Python later. I don't know. We'll see if I feel like it.
You know, I've always wondered if there's a sort of a music connection with people that are into like development and tech, because it seems like the structure of music sort of lends to like, you know, coding, the patterns, the structure. Do you find that that's like kind of why you gravitated towards that?
Absolutely. And even more than that, I gravitated toward mathematics as a kid for that reason. I got into music so young, and I was doing like, I was that nerd that was doing like algebra and geometry in like 6th grade and like always a couple of years ahead. So
that's funny.
I loved it. And then I forgot my love for it. When I was about 17, some stuff happened that at the time I thought that I just really suddenly lost a bunch of IQ points. But as it turns out, some of the stuff that happened actually does affect your brain chemistry and sometimes your neurology. So when I switched degrees to work toward mental health instead of toward history or art history, I was told that I would have to take more math. And when I tell you that I cried every day over those research statistics, I sobbed, but I got through it. And I really think that anybody can get that, but the music definitely helps.
Yeah. I'm sure it was like riding a bike, right?
Exactly.
Like once you got into it, I'm sure you figured it out pretty quick, right?
Oh, yeah. It definitely, it's never become comfortable again the way that it was when I was a kid, but it's become a lot more navigable, and I fell back in love with it.
Yeah.
Now I'm trying to fall in love with physics right now.
Really?
I've got a big physics book on my bookshelf that I'm trying.
That's awesome. So during this sabbatical, I'm sure you had to be like super dedicated to your budget and everything, right? So how did you sort of stay on top of that to like be like, okay, I'm going to make this go for a year, right? You did it for a year?
The people around me thought I was nuts.
Yeah.
They thought I was nuts. And they're probably a little bit right. But no, I mean, I grew up with a pretty tight budget. Whenever my mom and my dad first divorced and my mom and I moved back to Norman from Sand Springs, she was getting paid something like $27,000 a year, which even though it was more back then than it is now, it still was not tough. Much. Yeah. And that was a single mom's take. I'm like, oh God. So I grew up with that budget mindset. And additionally, her parents both grew up pretty poor, especially her dad. Her dad was one of like 9 or 10 kids, and they couldn't even afford shoes for all the kids. Yeah. So we'd always been very frugal as a family, and I'd grew up with the mindset.
Okay.
So it was pretty easy for me, but people would look at me using my I would make my own coffee creamer with like powdered milk and sugar and some cinnamon like shake it up in a jar and then use scoops of that. And I mean, my friends would come to my house and be like, what are you doing? What are you doing?
That's very cool. I mean, it just shows how resourceful and how dedicated you were to doing that, right?
Yeah, I'm willing to sacrifice anything on the altar of a goal, for sure.
I don't know if you've ever stumbled across like the people that do like live in the van life on YouTube. Have you seen that? I always get like sucked into watching that, and it's just like watching them like camp out in the middle of nowhere, and they're living in their van, and they just like do whatever. Honestly, sounds pretty amazing.
It does.
I don't know.
In my head, like I know that the insurance would be crazy and the risk level would be so high, but at the same time, it's like it's so hard to look at a van with a bed in it and not just be enthralled.
Right.
I'm so intrigued.
They never show the cons though, right?
Yeah,
like,
of course. And there are tons.
Where do you shower? What if you have to go to the restroom middle of the night, right? They never show that part, so I don't know how terrible that is.
Or like what happens when your car insurance that you didn't tell you were doing this with finds out, because a lot of people try to pull that. Or like what happens if you need health insurance and you're doing the digital nomad thing. But I mean, still, it's like so nice to just think about it.
Yeah, I mean, just like being able to drive to different like even like national parks, right? And just like see this amazing like sunrise, sunsets. It'd be really cool, I think. Did you ever sort of like think about maybe pursuing something like that or no?
I did. I thought about it, but you know, I at first I thought maybe I made a mistake buying my home, because whenever I did that, all of my friends were like, a condo, what are you, 70? What are you
That's
doing?
Funny. Yeah.
But I've been really pleased with it, and I especially got really grateful about it while I was in that kind of self-funded sabbatical, because I mean, truthfully, I've got a fixed interest rate, so it's not like my rate is going to change.
Right.
I don't have to wait for a landlord to come do the landlord special on a repair.
You don't have to do lawn work. You don't have to maintenance, all that stuff, right?
And I've got this little balcony where I can sit outside in the morning and sip my coffee and let my cat look at birds. And so even though I really would have liked to have the opportunity to travel during that, I'm glad that I used my budget the way that I did, because it allowed me to do what was really most important.
Yeah. So you sort of like did that for a while, and then did you just feel like you were ready to pursue something else, or you know, how did you go to that next step?
I got to a point where I felt like I had given my art enough time to kind of grow and develop on its own, that I felt comfortable going back into the workforce and thinking, okay, I can still carry on my art while I do this.
Yeah.
And that was important to me, because what I don't want to do is put the pressure on my art too early in its life to pay my bills. I want to tell my art, like, let me pay the bills. You just evolve and do your own thing. One of the biggest mistakes that I made with like my tarot reading stuff is I thought everybody else knew better than me. And I thought that I had to get really monetarily successful with it really, really fast. And that got me into some like deals and relationships and engagements that I look back and I don't necessarily outright regret, but I do wish that I had held off on them for a while and maybe developed my own voice first. And I don't want that to happen with my art. I want to be more slow and deliberate with it.
Yeah, I love what you said about your relationship with artistry. I forget the exact wording, but you said that it should be fed and respected, right? So tell me about sort of your relationship with the art and how you respect it. How do you feed it?
Yeah.
Because I thought that was really cool.
For me, since my art in its current iteration came about, or at least originated a little bit while I was in the hospital, the most important thing that I learned was it was like, I'm not supposed to squeeze anything out of this. It doesn't exist to do anything for me.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a child. Like that child does not exist to serve you. Maybe it will one day if you've had the good relationship with it. You know, maybe, you know, we all want to think like, okay, my son, my daughter, my child is going to take care of me when I'm retirement age.
Right.
But the way that you get to that is not by forcing it on them.
Yeah.
The way you get to that is by loving it unconditionally. And that's what I want to do with my art. Is just give it that space to evolve and breathe on its own and trust that it will become cohesive enough. And it already is. I've got a collection that I'm working on that I'm really excited to unveil soon.
That's really cool. Yeah. I really sort of like enjoyed reading that part because some people do put a lot of pressure on their artwork. They're quickly like, hey, I need to monetize this. I need to figure out how to make a business. But you're like, okay, let's let the art sort of like dictate where this goes, right?
Yeah. And like I've done the whole like hustle thing for first of all, for my entire life. I've always been a natural bred hustler, even when I wasn't very good at it. And then, you know, I've had my LLC since I was 21 years old. That was like my birthday gift to myself when I was 21 for my tarot stuff. But I made sure to put it down as a production company. So it's not like it's not necessarily just one thing or the other. It can evolve as much as I want it to. And for that reason, I don't feel the need to like just generate income through that. I can really be choosy about, okay, am I ready to part with this piece or not? Am I ready to go to this Prince website or not? Those things.
Cool. How have you seen your artwork sort of evolve throughout your life? Because it sounds like it's sort of like changed over the years, and maybe like what was happening in your life at that time, it sort of like dictated probably the art too, right?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I've always leaned toward figurative art and toward the body, especially since I was very young. And I don't think I understood at the time what I was trying to express, but I know now looking back that body autonomy and power, not in the sense that it usually gets used in pop culture as in power over other people.
Right.
The power is in over yourself and your destiny. You know, I am what is that one poem Invictus where it's like, I'm the master of my fate. I'm the captain of my soul or something. That's the kind of power that I gravitate toward and want to express, as well as like vulnerability through it. And what that's looked like has definitely changed over the years. But I mean, some common things that keep coming through regardless are like feminine figures and exploration of feminine identity, and anything with a skeleton in it, let's be honest.
Yeah, no, I think that's cool, but to me, that's sort of like probably the hardest subject to paint, right? Like the women body, like that's like super hard, right? Like, did you were you good at it from the start, or did you get better throughout the years, or what?
I think I wasn't good at it, but I can see why people around me thought I was, because I wasn't always very good with my words. And to this day, I still sometimes struggle with my words. But I was always very good with writing and with translating something from my head into something in my hand. So even when I was little, my drawings, I guess, looked different from what you would expect from my age group. Not necessarily better, but different qualitatively.
So you weren't doing stick figures.
No, I draw the worst stick figures, to be totally honest. Like I'm like bad at things that people consider super easy, and then I'm good at the things that they consider hard. And to me, it's the dead opposite. Almost always. That's
funny. So tell me, who would you say is your greatest teacher? Tell me about that.
So I had this teacher. He was my vocal music teacher in high school, and his name was Tony Gonzalez. I think he's retired now, but he was absolutely incredible. He was this guy from like South Texas. He would always have the best stories, and he brought in like a lot of what he taught us about music and about intonation and about engaging with art meaningfully was from sort of the dichotomous experience that he had growing up in a Mexican family that was very traditional. So he would have the Sunday morning church, very strict and buttoned up, and, you know, sit to listen, kneel to pray, stand to sing, all that stuff. And then he would also have like, you know, the situation where, and I don't know if you're familiar with this or whether it was just his family, but where he would have like all of his uncles show up and just jam out in the garage together.
That's like a weekend. That's a regular weekend.
Right? And so he taught us to love the arts and to love music in a lot of the same way that he did, both in appreciating it like pedagogically and theoretically, like the lessons that we learn, at church whenever we have to pretend that we're all, straight-laced, but also in terms of just like passion and enjoyment, the way that his uncles taught him.
That's cool.
And I loved that teaching.
Yeah. So. Did you ever explore with singing in Spanish?
Yes,
you did?
We did.
Yeah.
Well, we sang a pretty wide variety of stuff, and some of my favorites were that we sang some Octavio Paz poems that had been translated.
Okay.
But he kept them in the original Spanish instead, and
That's
so
awesome.
we found arrangements of them in those, and we would read the English translation in class just so that everybody could understand it, because some people spoke Spanish and some people didn't in Norman, but then we would sing it in the Spanish, and he would walk us through speaking the poems together. He would give us like notes on how to pronounce everything, and then he would have us, when you're in a traditional church, like the old like Catholic ones, and they'll all pray together, and everybody's reading it, but they haven't prayed together before the same exact prayer, but somehow they land on the same intonations.
Yeah, and there's like a rhythm, right?
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
He would have us read through these poems together first and see where we wanted to lean in, and then see where we wanted to exhale and inhale and all that stuff.
Okay.
And then whenever we would start singing it, like sight reading the music with it, then we would all kind of have that flow and that rhythm together.
That's
it was
cool.
really cool.
That's cool. Would you say that you believe anybody can learn to sing?
Yes.
I've always wondered that.
Absolutely.
You think so? Because some people are just like naturally talented, right? But you're telling me I can go and learn how to sing.
Yes.
Yeah.
There is methodology to it. And I'm probably not the one to teach it, but there is methodology to it. And one of the things that Mr. G, we called him Mr. G, would tell us was that some of the best, like the naturally best singers were the worst teachers, because they didn't actually understand mechanically what was going on with them.
They just do it like naturally, right?
One of my favorite ones was he would tell us about this article that he read, and he would like roast these classical music magazines all the time just for giggles. But he said that he had been reading an interview with Pavarotti, the famous Pavarotti.
Right.
And in this interview, somebody asked, "How do you sing high?" And it's like, what kind of question is
I could just do it, right?
He would go, "To sing high, it is like a controlled yell." And Mr. G would just lose it over that. He was like, "A controlled yell? Tell me what a controlled yell is." Or when people would be like, "Well, try to sing through a hole in the top of your head," he'd be like, What are you talking about? Or like, "Use your stomach muscles." He would go, "The stomach's not a muscle."
Right.
What are you doing?
Yeah, I always wondered about that, because that's sort of like one of my things. I wish I was like more musically talented, right? So I've always wanted to learn how to sing and even play an instrument. I failed at both, so I just DJ'd. So that was sort of my outlet there on the music side.
That's probably good though, because if you're not very confident and you're very loud at the same time, it can be hard to correct yourself.
True.
But if you lack the confidence and you're just a little bit quieter, then that means that you'll listen to yourself a little bit more.
Yeah.
So you'll be more inclined to like really tune yourself up in a powerful way. Probably the best lesson that he gave us was like posture is such a key thing, because everybody thinks if you like straighten your posture, then you're trying to like, I don't know, look bougie or something, I don't know. But he would say the reason that we do this is because if you put your hands on your sides here, on your ribs, and you inhale without moving your shoulders up, because a lot of us do that thing when we inhale, that your ribs are built to expand outward.
Okay.
And you've got a muscle thing called the diaphragm. It may not be an actual muscle, but it's called the diaphragm that sits over your organs underneath your lungs. And when your lungs start expanding, it knows to push those organs down and out of the way. So your lungs expand in all directions here.
Interesting.
And that plus ab control in front of those is what allows you to really control that breath for singing.
Yeah. Breathing is critical when you're singing, right?
It is. And everybody's like, well, just use your breath. Use breath support. Breath support. It's
Yeah,
like, that means
definitely.
nothing, bro.
That's funny. Yeah. So that's interesting. One of the things I always ask my guests is like, if we were to pull up your playlist, who am I going to find on your playlist?
God.
So you tell me.
Hopefully an exorcist, dude.
Yeah.
I listen to such an eclectic mix, and
Really?
like who I'm going to say is my favorite is changeable, like day over day and week over
same.
week.
It's
like
the same way.
It's a whole thing. I mean, lately I've been revisiting. There's a Simmel EP, SYML,
Okay.
and he did an EP. I want to say that it's called "Hurt for Me." and that's the title of one of the tracks. But the whole thing just sounds like it's underwater. And he's a beautiful pianist, this like one solo guy, and beautiful vocals, and it's just very cinematic. And that's what I've been revisiting lately, aside from like Royal Blood, because I go back to like the same 2014 Royal Blood album over and over again. I don't know.
Cool.
So those are those.
What
two.
About guilty pleasures? I'm sure you sort of like
Guilty
have somebody that
pleasure.
you listen on their playlist and you don't want anybody to know you listen to them, but you do listen to them, right?
Probably the Lana Del Rey has one album that I cannot stop eating out of her hands.
Yeah,
and
she's amazing.
It's the one with Mariner's Apartment Complex on it. The way that particular song swells, it's like, I don't know, it does something consciousness altering to me. I'm not sure.
Yeah. No, Lana's amazing. The thing about her music too is like, it's left up to interpretation too.
Yeah.
Some people think it's really sad and some people think it's a vibe. Like, and I enjoy that kind of art where it's like left up into interpretation.
Yeah. Right? I definitely vibe with that too, as like a quintessential melancholic girl myself. I'm like, I vibe with that. Cause it's like, I find in Lana something that I relate to, and I'm kind of mad at myself cause I don't really like her as a person, to be totally honest, but God, her music, she has, it seems like a lot of the same thing that I have, where people will look at her art and think, project onto it like whatever they want.
Yeah.
That happens a lot with my art, especially in figurative art, because I paint a lot of like nude figures, which is for me vulnerability and stuff. And I'll have like just these weird men at art events come up and be like, this is really erotic. And I'm like, please don't.
Yeah.
Please don't.
That's so weird because when I saw that stuff, I sort of took like the empowerment.
Yeah.
Like that's what I saw, right? When
Exactly.
I saw that. But that's a bummer if you get like all these weirdos. That's not cool.
And especially because it's like, that's an area that I'm trying to process pain in my life that I'm like, bro, please, I'm begging you not to do. But I find relatability with Lana in that way, that she gets that like all the time. Like where people just, I hear young frat boy dudes talk about her being like, yeah, this song is so hot.
Right.
But then you hear girls of the same age talk about it and it's like, yeah, this really nails like my depression.
Yeah,
and it's like, bruh.
Yeah, they try to put her in a box, right? Like that happens with artists all the time. They just try to put you in a box, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I think of like, on the same kind of vibe, I think of like Georgia O'Keeffe, when her husband, who is this royal F boy named Alfred Stieglitz, who's also the father of like modern photography and did beautiful work himself, to be fair. But he was just a total jack. And he would look at these huge abstract flowers that she did. Yeah. And he'd talk about how it was actually paintings of her anatomy.
Oh, wow.
And she was like, I have never said that, nor have I ever implied that. Yeah. And he would just roll with it. And to this day, people still think that, even though in her writings, she explicitly says, nah, dude, that's not it. That's not it. Yeah. This is what it is.
Yeah. I've heard that Italian ballroom dancing is dangerous.
Oh God!
Right now, I've heard through the grapevine. Is that dangerous? Do we need to take a little drink before we dive into this, or what?
I have one experience with ballroom dancing that, like, I don't know, it both scarred me and taught me for life.
Wow.
I was doing, I don't know if you're familiar with Variety Healthcare, but they do a lot of like local work to benefit communities, especially where healthcare is really hard to access.
Okay.
And they're around in Oklahoma City here. They're a fabulous organization. They've operated for years. And I don't know if they still do it because I haven't kept up, but for years and years, they did a variety show to like be their fundraiser. And so they would have like the Variety Healthcare variety show. Mm-hmm. And I was performing in it when I was in high school. I was a senior, and I don't even remember how I got connected with the lady that was like directing it that year. But we were doing rehearsals at this little like dance studio in Edmond. Mm-hmm. And I got there early because I get to everything early. I can't help it.
Yeah, you got here super early today.
I didn't even mean to. I don't know how.
Yeah.
I left Norman at 5:15. Yeah. I was like, what happened?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I usually people are like super late. So,
really?
Yeah. Shout out to you.
I'm that like jackwagon that like judges so hard when people are late. Yeah. I try not to, but anyhow, so I was there early, and I was just stretching and trying to like kind of work through my choreography, which was not ballroom dance. It was for like a very specific number that I was going to do with like the lady that was directing and this other chick. And anyway, this man just like waltzes in, and he's like talking and big with his hands, and he's got to be maybe 65 or 70 years old. And, but I mean, very graceful in the way that he walks, and the shoes that he's got on his feet are like pointing very deliberately with every step he takes. It just looks like choreographed walking when he's coming in. he turns around the corner into the dance studio and is yelling back to the lady that was directing stuff and waiting to greet people as they got there. He's going, oh, is this her? This is her. Okay, you give me 5 minutes and I'll have her ballroom dancing. Yeah, I promise you I will have her waltzing. And I was like, well, what are we doing?
What's going on?
What's happening? And he doesn't even like wait for me to be like, yep, that's me. Or like, no, that's not me. Yeah. Which it was not my number. It turned out there was a whole different number. Like it was not for me.
So you didn't sign up for
I
ballroom?
didn't sign up for this.
Okay.
Like, he walks up to me and he goes, listen, I have 2 rules for you. Eyes on me, feet moving.
Okay.
And I was like, oh God. So I was like, okay, this is what we're doing. And he like positions my arms up and everything. And he's got like a hand on my back and one holding this arm. And anyway, he starts like moving us and we're like spinning. And I'm just focusing on, okay, eyes on you and feet moving. Mm-hmm. And it's a dance studio. So there's this whole wall of mirrors off to one side. And people have started like coming in. And I don't even know how long we were doing this.
Is there music going on or is this like in silence?
It's just silence. Yeah. We're just going. And I mean, somebody's got something outside that they're talking about. And some of the other people that were going to rehearse are coming in. And anyway, I made one little mistake, which this is where my footwork faltered, was I broke the rule about keeping my eyes on him. And I looked over to the mirror and I thought, oh my God, it looks like I know what I'm doing. Holy
And then you tripped or something?
Yeah, and I like
happened?
tripped. And then anyway, the lady that was directing comes in. She's like, no, that's not her. That's not her. That's not her. And so we got it sorted out then. But that really stuck with me because there have been so many times in life since then where I've kind of reminded myself of that moment and just been like, okay, well, if I just focus on what I need to focus on and keep my feet moving, things kind of pan out. It's a little crazy. Like even if there's some stumbling blocks along the way. So that ended up being like how I got through the self-funded sabbatical. Wow. All that other stuff was just keep your eyes on the goal and keep your feet moving. Like
that's a real cool story because most people would have been like, hey, it's not me. So just go sit down, guy. Like
that's that people pleaser thing. Like I will rebel so hard if I think somebody's getting bullied or something. Yeah. But the moment somebody gives me a duty that's not actually mine, like if you come up to me in a grocery store and start asking me directions, I'll probably give them to you, to be honest. Like I'm that person.
Yeah,
like,
that's funny. So did you ever want to pursue dance any further or you're like,
oh my gosh,
one time and I'm out or what?
I love dance. I grew up dancing a lot. I was in ballet when I was really little. I was in tap, but it was like too fast for me. I don't know. I like things slower. And then once I was a young adult, I got into belly dance. I tried to get back into ballet, but I could not for the life of me get it. Yeah. So, but I've always been into dance, just not that dance.
Right. That's funny. Yeah, I would have been like, hey, it's not me. Guys.
Yeah, I'd be like, whoa, wait.
Yeah, that's cool. So you mentioned your goal for this year was to increase your following, right?
Yeah.
But in addition to that, maybe what are some of your other goals for your art?
Definitely just trying to develop greater cohesion because in my year off, my focus was just on allowing myself to create as freely as possible and as much as possible, just to like kind of see what some patterns were that I was seeing, see where things wanted to go, develop some specific skills a little bit further. But right now I want to work toward having some cohesive collections and then I want to show my art more. But I'm not necessarily motivated to sell a whole lot at this moment. Okay. I think I want to focus more on selling once I've got some more cohesive shows locked down where it's like, okay, I'm debuting this specific collection to the public and these are available for sale.
So I know you were doing sort of the shows with your Aura watercolors, but you haven't done any shows with your actual work present day?
I've done a few like little group shows and things. Okay. I don't want to make the same mistake that I did with my tarot stuff where I dive into something too quickly, too much that I don't end up liking later. So I just want to take it really slow and deliberate when it comes to committing to like a gallery or something. I want to assess my opportunities really strongly and choose very deliberately. Yeah. So
I like that. I think I already know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyways. So do you ever do any commission stuff?
No,
I figured.
I mean, I think I could be talked into it by somebody close to me. Yeah. But usually if I say like, I'm open to commissions, the first thing that happens is somebody goes, would you paint my dog?
And you're like, I'm not going to enjoy that. Right?
I'm going to hate that. And you're going to hate it too. I promise.
Yeah.
So I typically steer clear, but I've got a friend in another state that has been talking about, okay, I'm getting close to my savings goal and I want to get a commission with you. So start thinking, but that's a little bit different from just, any old Yahoo.
Yeah. I figured that might be the answer, but I thought I would ask anyways. And then it also sounds like you're not sort of interested in maybe selling at this time, right? So people can't go to a website and purchase anything.
If there's something that they want, they can talk to me. And if I'm doing like a market or something, usually I'll have my web shop up for a certain number of days for that, where I'll use like QR codes to make it really easy. But I'm just not doing a whole lot of that. So at this time, I invite people to just inquire with me about availability. And most of my pieces are available. So it's like, hey man, if you want it.
Yeah, cool. Well, that's the perfect segue for you to plug in. Where can people find you?
Yeah.
Where are you more active, social media, anything you'd like to plug in, go for it.
Sure. So my website is laurenkelly.art instead of .com because that was available and I just jumped right on it.
I like it.
My social media handles are all the same. So I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok. I just got on Threads because why not add another data tracking opportunity for Zach. But the only one that I'm really not on is Facebook. So just about anywhere, as long as you look for laurenkelly.art.
TikTok as well?
Yes, TikTok as well. Okay. Oh, yeah.
That's cool. Awesome.
For sure.
Very cool. Before we wrap up, we are getting the signal here that we're running out of time.
Yeah.
But I always ask my guests to tell me something about themselves that most people don't know about.
How dweeby do you want me to answer
It's up to you, however you want.
Because I can write with my toes.
No way.
Yeah.
Really?
It's kind of ugly, but I can do it, man.
How did you figure that out?
By writing with my toes.
You're just like, one day I'm bored, I'm just going to write with my toes?
Yeah. It was like one of those, whenever you're like a super weird kid, you find really weird kid things to do to just like lean into the weirdness. And so I learned when I was about 12 that I could write with my toes. And then I ended up signing people's yearbooks with my toes. And I'm just so sorry to anybody that experienced that. I really am.
Now I'm going to be curious if you are signing your artwork with your toes.
It would be, it would look like a third grader did it if I did that. So, but I might, who knows,
Yeah, that's funny. That's awesome. Well, I want to thank you for being a guest. I know you're super busy, so definitely thank you for your time today. The door's always open, so anytime you want to come back and just hang out, talk about whatever, you're always welcome.
Well, thank you, Luis. It's been a real pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. There you have it. Ladies and gentlemen, the super talented Lauren Kelly on the Maverick Podcast. Keep grinding because in dreams we trust.